Hello my friends, this is William M. Briggs, back for another lesson in climate and really all other models. Today our topic is going to be something called homogenization. Now I'm going to have for you at the bottom of this video a link to a very long and technically complex article, because this is a very long and technically complex subject. I can only give you the absolute bare minimum of this, and a lot of it won't make a lot of sense unless you can grasp some of these technical details. But all we really need to know is when climate scientists, climatologists and the like, use temperatures from either in the past or now in modern day terms, they don't just use that data as raw data. You have a thermometer in your backyard, you're experiencing the temperature day by day, you look at it every day at noon or something like this, you mark it down, and from this, particularly in the northern hemisphere, we've experienced a very cold and long winter. It's still cold. It will be lingering still in the location in which I am in. It was still freezing temperatures and the like, but yet we'll hear reported after a suitable period of time passes, a few weeks or a month or something like this. This will be, I'm recording this in April of 2025 towards the end, and it's still going to be freezing at night. But we'll still hear, temperatures verify that this is one of the warmest Aprils on record. Now, how can they do something like this when we're all experiencing cold? Well, it's because of this homogenization idea. Now, if we're at a location, I'm going to call this location A. Just some location. Now, a long time ago, 100 years ago or something like this, this is a location in which it was out in a field. It was in a field, it was not a lot of people around, and we had just a thermometer, an old mercury thermometer that was at the site, that was put out there, and the people began taking measurements. There's all kind of different measurements that people used, all sorts of different equipment that people used throughout the centuries. And every time they changed the instrument or the method of operation, or the time of day at which they took measurements, or the times of day at which they took measurements, or whether or not a box was built around the measuring, the mercury thermometer itself, whether or not it had vents in it to allow airflow, all these kinds of things. Every time an instrument is changed, that is a different recording. All right? And every time that we have a different recording, because we have a technically new instrument, we have a different time series. We have a different time series of temperature. And so the idea is we want to homogenize these kinds of things. But it's not only because of changes in instrumentation. It can be, and this is a strange one. This is what they'll do is they'll try to homogenize temperatures for movement of station. So right now we have a station at our particular location A, but it wasn't always at A. At some time in the past, it was at location B. But B moved, however far it was, to station A. This could be many, many miles, it could be, or just plain many, many feet or something like this. But there's a station change from B to A. Now I'm going to ask you a very technical, deeply scientific question. Suppose that B was 10 miles away at a different location entirely, and we now have temperatures that we're measuring at A. Now, here's my question to you. Is A the same as B? No. But for whatever reason, because scientists want to have the longest possible time series at certain locations, they'll say, well, I'm going to make B into A. I'm going to pretend that B was A. So when we have A here, A didn't start until sometime in the past, say like 1940 or 1930 or something like this. And we don't have any measurements at A before that, but we do happen to have measurements at B. And so what we'll do is we'll use some model. This is going to be a model of how B predicts A, and I'll talk about that in a second. We'll use a model of how temperatures at B would predict the temperatures at A. And we'll substitute them in as if they were for A. Now, why would we do this? There's no good reason to do this. You might want to have known what the temperature was at A. We don't have any measurements at A, but we could use models to make guesses of what the temperature at A might have been, and we can use information like what the temperature was at B, or at B and location C, or at locations B, C, and D, or any of a host of other information that we might have, and we might make guesses of what the temperature was at A. But we'll never know. We'll never know because, of course, there was no temperature at A. So we'll have to include some idea of plus and minus in this. It won't be just these figures like this, although we'll see them drawn like this. Again, we'll have to have some kind of envelope on there. And we're going to talk about that envelope and what it means. Now, it's not just like I say, it's not just changes in location, although changes in location are not really the same station at all, but they pretend that they're the same station. And there's no reason to do that, but they do it because they desire this long series. So we'll come to that. It could be that we had this thermometer. That's how we started out. Then we built a wooden shelter around it, which is kind of standard. And then eventually we replaced this mercury thermometer that was inside this wooden shed with some electronics at this date right here to make it what we think is either more accurate or at least more convenient or something like this. But nevertheless, we have a change. We have a discontinuity here. And so really what we have again is a new station. We have a new way of measuring temperature. So in order to guess how these are the new electronic measurements are in this regime, and this is the old mercury. We want to have a prediction of or that's what they do when they do this homogenization. They make a prediction of what the electronic information would have been back then. And again, we have to have this plus or minus. Now, here's the strange one, the really strange one. As time has progressed, this area right here was an open field back in 1930, 1940, and as time progressed, an airport grew up around it. Now, and this particular, the electronics have stayed the same since this date, maybe back in the 1980s or something like this, but meanwhile, an entire airport has arisen around this thing. Now I want to ask you another tough question. Here it is, this thing here, we're going to assume all these instruments are perfectly accurate or something like this. If we measure the temperature to be this, and there's now an airport around this, what is the real temperature? We've measured it to be this value here. Suppose it's 25 degrees. We measure it to be 25 degrees, and we know there's an airport around this. What is the true temperature? Well, the answer is 25 degrees because we've assumed there's no air. But for some reason, this perplexes people, and they say, well, what if we want to measure the temperature when there was no airport there? Well, there is no instance in which we don't have an airport there because the airport is there. Nevertheless, we can model this counterfactual question. We can guess what the temperature might be if no airport is there, or no city is there, or no other buildings are there, or something like this, and it was just a plain old a field of grass or whatever in the past. We can make those, and again, we have to have a model that does that. But there's no reason to do that because we're supposing this thing is measuring accurately. This is the temperature that we are going to experience if we're standing by the thermometer here, whatever kind of thermometer we have, even though there's an airport around it. So we have all of these contradictory ideas that flow into this homogenization. So basically what they do is they take data from all these different sources and they kind of stitch it together in an odd way. Not always in a coherent way. And then they say to themselves, well, we got to adjust this for whatever reasons because we want to pretend we really had one long homogeneous time series of temperature data at station A. And that's the kind of data we're going to plug into our models. Well, you can do all this. You can do it, but it requires a model. It requires a model. And again, we're going to use our cartoon basic model here, which we've talked about in previous lessons. We want to measure the temperature at A as some function of the instrumentation, which is what this dot might be, or at B, what the temperature was at B, or a whole host of other things, many other things. Now, when they spit this model out, again, they give you uncertainty in this particular parameter of the model. And I'm going to have a picture that you'll be able to see if you want to read the article that shows you how dramatic this difference can be. we look at these predictions, and we can make these kind of parametric uncertainty bounds as plus or minus, because we know that this is not the real temperature. We're making a guess of what the temperature would have been at A. But that's not what we need to do. We need to have the predictive temperature cast in terms of actual temperatures at actual A. And when we do stuff like this, we find we have uncertainty bounds. If we're to draw the uncertainty of this, we have things that look like this, just blobs. Or we should have things that look like this, which means we can't be real certain what happened at any time. Yet, we hear statements of certainty all the time given by modelers and the like. They're overstating things. They're always overstating things. They're overstating the actual certainty they have in the models, in the predictions, and everything else they have. Well, there are ways to account for it, and I'll spend an entire class just going through the difference between parametric and predictive uncertainty so we can hone in on this exactly. So we can see exactly, well, I'll use a very simple example that we could, everybody should be able to follow. But realizing that the real examples that go into these models and everything, they're somewhat complex and everything. But there's a lot of strange things that do happen when they try this homogenization. If we could ever have a chance to look at raw data, if you ever see the chance to look at raw data and not homogenized data, and you really have to check, because a lot of times they'll call the homogenized data the raw data. It's counterfactually raw data, it's not actual raw data. So it's really difficult to see what's going on here, and because there's so many hands that touch all this stuff, the process just becomes unwieldy. And again, over-certainty is generated. All right, I'm going to have a link for you, and as always, please, if you can, subscribe and all that kind of thing to this, and we'll talk again and try to go over this very difficult concept of parametric versus predictive uncertainty. Thanks very much.